Prairie Yard and Garden is a production of the University of Minnesota Morris in cooperation with Pioneer Public Television. Funding for Prairie Yard and Garden is provided in part by Heartland Motor Company, providing service for over 30 years in the heart of truck country. Heartland Motor Company, we have your best interest at heart. Farmers Mutual Telephone Company and Federated Telephone Cooperative, proud to be powering ASERA. Mark and Margaret Yakel Julien, in honor of Shalom Hill Farm, a nonprofit rural education retreat center in a beautiful prairie setting near Windham in southwestern Minnesota. Shalom Hill Farm, shalomhill.org. Diamond Willow Advanced Care Assisted Living, providing custom homes with smaller settings designed especially for high care needs.
When we buy a home, we are investing in something that we hope will last a long time and may even become worth more as time goes on. We often take out an insurance policy to help make sure our home is protected. The same can be said for the trees we plant in our yard. We plant them with the hope that they will last a long time and add value and beauty. I'm Mary Holm, and come along as we find out what steps we can take that are like an insurance policy to help our newly planted trees grow big and strong. Tom and I are so lucky to have big, beautiful trees in our yard. They help filter noise, stop the wind, and give us wonderful shade when we play beanbag toss with our friends and family. They also provide a home to the many birds that give us so much pleasure. Last year on Prairie Yard and Garden, we learned that planting a tree is as easy as 1, 2, 3. This year we have Gary Johnson returning to help us with 4, 5, 6, so we don't have to pick up sticks. Welcome back, Gary.
Thank you. Very clever.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to get your opinion and your knowledge as to how we can take care of trees after we plant them to keep them alive.
Absolutely.
How much should you water a newly planted tree?
That's a really good question, because most people have been trained to think about the volume or the dose, how many gallons of water, how many minutes to run the hose, when in actuality it's the frequency that's most important. So the first thing I tell people is pay no attention to the weather report. All trees, all newly planted trees and shrubs should be watered 2 times a week through that first growing season. And the problem with listening to a weather report is how much rain are you actually going to get? And is it actually going to rain? So, in terms of the life of the tree, just disregard it 2 times a week. Then the next thing is the dose, or the amount of water. And again, that's kind of misunderstood too. For a newly planted tree, we base it on the stem caliper, and this is research-based information too. And the stem caliper is measured 6 inches above the ground, the width of the stem. And for each inch of the width, you need approximately a gallon and a half of water. So if you had a 2-inch caliper, that's what it's called, caliper tree, that would mean that you need to put down about 3 gallons, 3-4 gallons is just fine, of water. Then the next thing is placement of it. And when I was young, I was taught, to soak down the whole area, which is a waste of time. Just put the water where the root system is. So if it's containerized plant, or basically where you dug the hole, put it right over the root system. And then you do that 2 times a week. The simplest way is take your garden hose and get a bucket, hopefully a 3 or 5 gallon bucket, and just time how long it takes to fill up to the 3 gallon mark or the 5 gallon mark. And then that tells you how long to stand out there with a hose and water. That's one way of doing it. The other way you can do it is again with a 5 gallon bucket, drill some holes in the bottom of it, sit it down right over the root system of the tree, get another 5-gallon bucket of water with 3 to 5 gallons poured in there and let it trickle down. That's a nice way too of making sure that the water doesn't run off from the surface. A third way is, these are called water rings. This is a hard plastic water ring. This holds just under 5 gallons of water. So this is really ideally suited for newly planted trees. And you can get the hard plastic, or you can get a type of a tube. And actually that's what it's called, it's a water tube. Then the last device is the watering bag. And there are a number of manufacturers of this, but essentially what happens is this zips around the trunk of the tree, so it'll look kind of like a garbage bag wrapped around the tree, quite honestly. And there's an opening to the outside, and that's where you put the water in. So if you want to fill this up all the way, it holds a total of 20 gallons. And you can do that if you want to. If you're in a real sandy soil, that's probably a good thing to do. But if it's a normal soil, yeah, you can just fill it up halfway. And you would do that again 2 times a week.
How about a tree that's moved in with a tree spade?
You know, no matter how the tree is planted, we call them rooting types, whether it's tree spade, or if it's hand dug with a soil ball, or if it's containerized, or if it's bare rooted, watering is based off of the stem diameter. So again, if the stem diameter of a tree spaded tree is 5 inches, you would go 5 inches times 1.5 gallons or 2 gallons. So maybe 10 gallons of water per irrigation. And the frequency would be the same. So it would be 2 times a week, 10 gallons 2 times a week. That's your minimum. Now, that's with a normal soil. If you have a wicked sandy soil that percolates so fast, that would be a time where you'd want to add organic amendments to the soil at planting, but even more importantly, an organic mulch on the surface to keep that moisture from evaporating away. There are probably 4 things that mulch does. Number one is it keeps the soil moisture uniform by reducing just the evapotranspiration. The second thing it does is it also moderates soil temperature. Then in the autumn, it takes a lot longer for that soil temperature to get cold. So as long as soil temperatures are above 40 degrees, roots are growing. So you'll have roots growing easily till Christmas time in Minnesota. The third benefit is as the mulch breaks down, and mulch when it breaks down is kind of unique. If it's an organic mulch, it breaks down from the underside up. So when you're looking at mulch and you think, oh, this stuff's going to last forever, it's actually become soil underneath that. And then the last advantage to it is it keeps string trimmers and lawnmowers away from the trunk of the tree.
How far out should you come with your mulch?
Yeah, that's a very reasonable question, and I'm going to base it on fact and then opinion.
Okay.
So for fact, we have a figure that we call the critical root area, and that is based on the stem diameter. So we'll go back to that 2-inch diameter, and for each inch of stem diameter, you go out 1 to 1.5 feet. So if you had a 2-inch stem diameter, you'd go out maybe 2 feet. So you would have a circular area of approximately 4 feet in diameter. Now, if you think about that, when trees get larger, let's say we've gone up to a 10-inch tree that's well established. If you go 20 feet all the way around, now it looks like a lumberyard. And that's my opinion. So I don't like that. So what I believe in doing is incorporating herbaceous plant materials, basically, recreating a woodland scene with understory shrubs, herbaceous plants like daylilies and hostas, which kind of hide the mulch.
I have heard that you shouldn't put mulch right up next to the stem. Is that right?
Absolutely, because now we go back with organic mulches like bark chips or wood chips or something like that. As it's breaking down, it becomes soil. So if you pile the wood chips up against the stem, it's the same as piling soil up against there. And I think people in the northern climates think that it takes a long time for wood chips and bark mulch to break down. It doesn't. It breaks down from the bottom up, and within a couple years, it's becoming soil. So you can effectively bury that stem too deeply out of kindness. Of trying to do the right thing. And then it leaves this perfect environment for stem girdling roots to start forming.
Do you recommend staking a tree up?
If it's flopping, I stake by exception. And so if a tree is planted and it's a very windy spot, and the second you plant it, it's starting to tip, absolutely, it needs to be staked. I don't stake by rule, because one of the physiological things that goes on in a tree when it moves in the wind, it strengthens the trunk. So it actually increases the caliper of the trunk, is what you want. And below ground, your main branch roots, with movement too in the wind, it strengthens them too, so they get larger. But you don't want it to be so windy that the tree is flopping out and the roots are exposed and they die. So in that case, yes, I would definitely stake. Sometimes just one stake is good enough. And in that case, you would put it on the windward side. So if the wind is predominantly from the southwest, that's where your stake would go. It would be on the southwest side. So it's actually going to be pulling the tree up, giving a little bit of support against the wind. So it's pulling it towards the wind. And these are garden stakes. They're not as heavy duty as the fence stakes that you see out on the farms and that, but it's quite a bit less expensive. That's one reason to use it. And for most practical purposes, it works pretty well. So if we had, I'm going to pretend that this is a tree, if I can pull that out of the ground, and I'm going to pretend that the wind is coming from that direction. So we're going to put the stake, and usually we have the little notches to the windward side on this. We're going to put the stake just a little bit away from the soil ball of the tree. You can still anchor it down into the hole that you dug, or it can be right at the edge of the hole. What you don't want to do is drive it down into the soil ball, because you could damage some roots.
Okay.
So then the next thing, you could use a hammer to pound this in, but I would really recommend using a post pounder or a driver, whatever you want to call it. And one of the mistakes people make when they use this is, and I've seen people doing this too, is they're trying to get this pounder up to get over. Lean the stake back, bring it to you, and then you just anchor it in until that plate goes below the ground. And this gives it enough support. Then the next thing is where to attach the floppy tree to the stake. And one of the things that I do is I just start grabbing the stem of the tree and holding it and holding it. And when I get to the point where the tree is actually, it's nice and straight and stable, that's where I put the attachment. What you don't want to do, and especially on the windy spot, is put that attachment right below the first set of branches, because that'll hold it rigid while the top is flopping in the wind, and it can snap. And I've seen it snap several times too.
Okay.
So it's usually down a little bit further from that. Next thing is you don't want anything to cut into the stem or girdle the stem. And I was taught, and a lot of people were taught too, to take a section of garden hose and put a wire through it, wrap it around the trunk, attach it to the stake, tighten it up. Don't do that. Even though there's a garden hose, that wire will still girdle the tree if you leave it on too long. And it's one of those things that's really easy to forget, that you've staked a tree and, oh my gosh, it's time to take that off. So the rule of thumb is we try to use something nice and wide and flexible. These are attachments, actually these are the attachments that Minnesota Department of Transportation uses when they plant trees. And it's basically just it's like a synthetic canvas. And you would put it around the trunk of the tree, make sure that the tree trunk can move in that. So then you can use any type of, you can use a rope or twine or wire or anything. So the little grommets in this, so we've got this flexibility now in the tree trunk, and then you just tie it up. And you can run it through the holes of these garden posts like this, and that'll keep it positioned right. And there you go. Now if you have a wicked floppy tree, then you'll want to have a second stake. And the second stake, so our first stake is on the windward side, the second stake would be on the leeward side. So it would be exactly 180 degrees away from that. And your second stake would have its own attachment too. So you'll still get this movement in here, which is really important. There is one other type of staking, and that's what I have here. And these are called grow tubes, and they're made by a company in Minnesota. And we use these a lot when we plant trees maybe that are only 1.5 to 2 feet tall. And it's basically a miniature greenhouse over the tree. So the tree is planted, this slips down on top of it. This is the actual stake then. And one of the reasons I like this type of stake is this. You know, it's strong, but it's flexible too. So it allows this movement in the wind, and that little tree that's growing up in there is flexing, and it's building up caliper on it too.
Okay.
And a typical tree planted in something like this, that's maybe 18 to 24 inches, by the end of the summer, it'll be out of the top of this. But these new designs, especially this particular one, allows that air movement in there. It also allows good sunlight in there. And so you get pretty normal growth. It's really accelerated. So totally believe in these things. You know, the other nice thing about this, Mary, other than the fact that it's this wonderful little growth chamber in here, more importantly, it protects it from animals. And you don't even really have to sink this down in the ground, but it keeps the rabbits away from it, which is probably our #1 problem. And then deer also. So when I think about stem protection, most of the time I'm thinking either mechanical injury, lawnmower, string trimmers, or critter injury. And then take it off after, you know, maybe mid-April to late April, because you don't want to keep any type of stem protection on when the plant is actively growing, because the bark is photosynthetic, and it photosynthesizes, and that's what helps it grow also. So the movement and then sunlight photosynthesizing, that's what helps stems grow. Another option, and this is one that's been around, oh gosh, for a long, long time, and you see this a lot in orchards. And orchards are really thinking in terms of what can we put around the trunk to protect mouse damage, rabbit damage, and vole damage. So again, on something like this, these work pretty well. Again, do not leave this on year round either. So now my absolute favorite, and this is kind of a new one. I just started using this 2 or 3 years ago now. And this is it is a plastic, but it's a heavy duty plastic. It opens up, so it would go around the tree trunk, just like we talked about the other ones. Yeah, a little bit easier than that. And again, you would attach it. We'll use a post, it's a little bit easier. On this one, again, you would use zip ties. Just tie it there, down there, and that works great. I have a lot of problems with deer and buck rubbing. And this does a great job, you know, as a stem protection to prevent deer, buck rubbing, or any type of deer damage. So I leave these on year round until the tree gets so big that it's starting to push, then I take it off. Mice can get through this. So if your problem is a vole or a mouse, then you're going to need something to the interior like hardware cloth or something like that. So the last little stem protection device, and if you're looking at this thinking like, does it have to be really short rabbits or deer? This is really designed to prevent string trimmer damage. And so it's very flexible, it goes on very easy, and I found it to do a really good job of it actually makes a lot of noise when you hear it with a string trimmer, so it stops people. But that's all this is designed to do, is prevent string trimmer damage.
Gary, we've got a newly planted tree. Should we fertilize our new trees?
Well, you know, first of all, I like to think of, instead of fertilizer, soil amendments. Because when we add things to a soil, we're sometimes adding nutrients to make the tree grow faster or look, you know, lush or green. But a lot of times what we're trying to do is we're adding things to the soil to build up a good environment for the microorganisms that are going to help the tree be healthy and grow better. And in actuality, in most Minnesota soils, there are very few nutrients that are deficient. So one of the ways of adding fertilizers, I know it's very popular, are these tree stakes. So the Job's fertilizer spikes, they do come with a little plastic cap. You slip it over the tree, little stake here, and the package will tell you how many stakes to put around a tree. So for something like this tree lilac, you'd probably put 3 to 5 stakes. You just pound it in the ground. It's a real easy way of getting nutrients down into the ground. This is completely synthetic though. I like organic for a couple of other reasons. One thing about organics is they do add the nutrients you're looking for too, but they're also adding a lot of carbon to the soil, which is what the mycorrhizal fungi, the bacteria, the actinomycetes, the beneficial flora and fauna in the soil really need is the carbon-based things. This is a nice, tidy little way of adding organic matter plus some nutrients to the soil for the tree. You can also use composted. This is mushroom compost, and I've used this a lot on newly planted smaller trees. I love this stuff. So I do get a nice, not a huge burst of growth, but it really builds up the soil. And this compost, this carbon in the soil, holds nutrients better too. So any nutrients you add subsequent to it, they're held in the soil better and made available to the plant roots for a longer period of time. And then you can go to other products like this one, which is basically, it's a 464, so it's a very low analysis of NP and K. So these are actually my favorite ones to use, but there's nothing wrong with putting down a synthetic fertilizer.
Gary, when you're applying soil amendments,
Yep.
where should you be applying it? Close to the tree or out by the drip line or where?
Depends. So if it's a newly planted tree and I'm going to add these amendments, I mix it in with the soil that I'm backfilling with, because that's where the roots are going to be for that first year. They're going to be breaking out into that planting hole. After the tree is established, there's there's that rule of thumb that for each inch of stem thickness, you go out about 1 foot to 1.5 feet. And that's your critical root area. Roots go way beyond that, but that's your critical root area. And so that's where you would add the fertilizer. So again, if the tree has maybe a 5-inch diameter trunk, you would go out at least 5 feet all the way around. You could go out up to 7.5 feet and apply the fertilizer in that area.
So if the roots are coming out that far, do you have to be concerned about that if you're applying chemical for like broadleaf control of weeds in your lawn?
Absolutely, and I think, and this is an easy one to forget too, is that trees are broadleaf, plantain is broadleaf, dandelions are broadleaf. Anything that kills a plantain or dandelion or creeping Charlie is going to harm a tree too. So within that critical root area, if you're using things, dicamba is one of the worst, but if you're using any of these broadleaf weed killers in there, yes, it can be taken up, and some plants are super sensitive to it. Mostly legumes. So like we're having problems with dicamba and soybeans now. Soybean is a legume, so is a honey locust, so is a redbud, so is a coffee tree. So they're very, very sensitive to those. And you should eliminate any of those broadleaf chemicals within that critical root zone of the tree.
I have a question. My property has an open northern exposure. I would like to plant a windbreak. What type of shrubbery or trees would you recommend?
Putting a windbreak on the north and or west side of your house is always a great idea in this climate to help with landscaping for energy conservation in the wintertime especially. It doesn't provide any shade during the summer, but it does break the wind for your house heating. One of the highly recommended plants that I recommend is Abies concolor, or white fir. It seems to be just really disease resistant, no insect problems. We're seeing a lot of insect and disease problems with our spruce trees and our pine trees, and so we're kind of getting away from recommending those plants. But if you're looking for an evergreen windbreak plant, I don't think you can beat this hardiness, disease and insect resistance. And also it's got this beautiful blue color, which a lot of people love the blue spruce, but we're really recommending not to plant blue spruce any longer. Some other plants that are possibilities are just the eastern red cedar, Juniperus virginiana. It's a great plant. They get a lot bigger than most people think, and they have beautiful foliage. They do have a kind of a bluish tinge depending on the genetic material that you get. They're usually grown from seed, but eastern red cedar is another really hardy, tough, native plant that I recommend for windbreak.
Ask the Arboretum Experts has been brought to you by the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum in Chanhassen, dedicated to enriching lives through the appreciation and knowledge of plants.
All right, the last thing I'm going to leave you with today is one of the more common questions that people ask is, what should I be pruning off on my newly planted tree? And you only prune off the bad stuff. You don't take off a percentage. So in a tree like this, first thing I'm going to do is get rid of this lower branch down in here. Well, for one thing, you're going to brush up against it with a lawnmower and you're going to break it off. Second of all, it's a temporary branch because this tree, this is one of our native cherry trees, and it's going to get up 25, 30 feet. And everything you're looking down at right now is pretty much temporary anyway. If you have it in a lawn situation, you want to be walking underneath it. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a lot of this kind of foliage right up in here because it's photosynthesizing, it's building up the stem caliper. And then the last thing I'm going to look at is we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 branches that are struggling and fighting to become the leader. I want one leader. And so what I'm going to do with the ones that I don't want to be a leader is this is called suppression. I'm just going to prune them back because eventually these branches will be removed. If you can imagine walking under this trying to mow, it's going to be slapping you in the face. But I don't want to remove them all now. So now I have a single leader here. Oops, I'm going to press this too. There we go. It's a nice single leader. If I didn't do that, one of the problems when you have multiple leaders is they may look like they're well attached, but actually if you can look interior to them, this is called included bark, and you can already see where it's starting to separate. These are the type of branches that in a windstorm or an ice storm or a snowstorm, they're going to rip apart right about the time the tree is to the size that you hoped it would be and it's providing shade. What I'm trying to do is encourage really, really strong branch unions, wood to wood, no included bark, because when you look to the interior, this is solid wood in here. This is really, really strong. This is going to be able to withstand the bearing weight of winds, heavy rains, ice, snow. That's what I'm trying to encourage on this. One leader until it gets pretty good size. Eventually all these branches will be removed.
Gary, this has been so interesting. Thank you so much for coming out and teaching us again. Would you be willing to maybe come back one more time next year and do a show just on pruning?
Well, first of all, you're welcome. I love coming here, and absolutely, I'll be more than glad to come back. And we can talk about pruning young trees, established trees, fruit trees if you would like, shrubs. Those are all really good topics.
Wonderful.
Funding for Prairie Yard and Garden is provided in part by Heartland Motor Company, providing service for over 30 years in the heart of truck country. Heartland Motor Company, we have your best interest at heart. Farmers Mutual Telephone Company and Federated Telephone Cooperative, proud to be powering ASERA. Mark and Margaret Yakel Julien, in honor of Shalom Hill Farm, a nonprofit rural education retreat center in a beautiful prairie setting near Windham in southwestern Minnesota. Shalom Hill Farm, shalomhill.org. Diamond Willow Advanced Care Assisted Living, providing custom homes with smaller settings designed especially for high care needs.